Michael Jordan discovers his lost daughter living homeless, and the next day, he gets the shock of his life. We dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of February. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this dream too. The night was heavy with the scent of rain. The pavement still glistening under the city lights as Michael Jordan exited the back entrance of an exclusive restaurant. The evening had been filled with polite conversations, business proposals, and the usual admiration from those who still saw him as the greatest player of all time. But as he stepped into the quiet hum of the Chicago streets, a strange pull made him pause. Across the street, nestled against the cold brick wall of a closed shop, sat a young woman, knees drawn to her chest, a tattered hoodie barely shielding her from the elements. There was something about her, an unsettling familiarity in the way she held herself. Michael tried to shake off the eerie sensation, but as their eyes briefly met, a sharp jolt of recognition hit him. He had met thousands of people in his life, yet something in her gaze made his breath hitch. He wasn't sure why, but he couldn't just walk away. A black SUV pulled up in front of him, his driver stepping out to open the door, but Michael hesitated. He turned back toward the girl, observing the way she hugged herself tighter, her face partially obscured by her hood. The world had always been kind to him, full of doors that opened with ease, but he knew that wasn't the case for everyone. Maybe she was just another lost soul on the streets, another statistic in the cruel reality of urban life. Yet, there was something about her that wouldn't let go of his mind. He took a step closer, unsure of what he was doing, but drawn forward nonetheless. "Hey," he called softly, his voice barely cutting through the traffic in the distance. She flinched, but didn't look up. It was only when he crouched beside her, lowering himself to her level, that she slowly lifted her chin, revealing a pair of deep brown eyes that mirrored his own. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Michael had always believed in the power of instincts, the same gut feeling that had guided him on the court for years. And now, those instincts screamed at him that this wasn't just a random encounter. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. The girl's lips pressed together as she scanned his face, her expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "You don't remember me, do you?" His heart pounded in his chest. There was no mistaking the slight tremor in her voice, the restrained bitterness, the pain of someone who had been abandoned or forgotten. Michael blinked, his mind racing. He didn't know what to say, but before he could respond, she dropped a bombshell that made his world tilt off its axis. "My mother said you're my father." The words hit like a freight train, knocking the air from his lungs. He had been in countless high-pressure situations, Game 7s, buzzer beaters, championship-deciding moments, but nothing had ever prepared him for something like this. He swallowed hard, staring at her face, searching for traces of a past he wasn't sure he had lived. Could it be true? Was this girl, homeless, abandoned, really his daughter? The idea was unfathomable, but the evidence was staring back at him with tear-rimmed eyes. His mind warred between disbelief and the undeniable familiarity in her features. He wanted to ask questions, to demand proof, but more than that, he wanted to understand. If this was real, if she was his daughter, then how had she ended up here, in the shadows of the city, instead of the warmth of a home? He took a deep breath, knowing that his life had just changed forever. "Tell me everything," he said, and for the first time that night, the girl met his gaze with something that looked like hope. The cold wind howled through the streets as Michael Jordan stood frozen in place, his heartbeat drumming in his ears. The young woman, his supposed daughter, shifted uncomfortably, the weight of the revelation heavy between them. He had been blindsided many times in his career, but nothing had ever shaken him like this. A father? He tried to recall a moment, a name, a past connection that could make sense of this claim, but his mind was a blur of memories, faces of women he had known, relationships that had faded with time. "Your mother, who is she?" His voice came out more strained than he intended, laced with confusion and urgency. The girl, still wary, hesitated before answering. "Her name was Vanessa," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Vanessa Carter." The name sparked something, a distant flicker in the recesses of his mind. It had been decades, back in the late 90s, a brief but passionate relationship that had ended before it truly began. He remembered her, smart, ambitious, and full of life. But how had she kept this from him? The girl, her name still a mystery to him, watched his expression closely, gauging his reaction. She never told you, she stated, more than asked. Michael exhaled, shaking his head. No, he admitted. She never did. A part of him wanted to deny it, to push back against the reality of it all. But deep inside, something told him this wasn't a lie. What happened to her? He asked, a sense of dread tightening in his chest. The girl's face darkened, her jaw tightening as she looked away. She passed away 2 years ago, she said simply, her voice void of emotion. A hollow ache settled in Michael's chest. And after that, he pressed, needing to understand. Where have you been? The girl let out a dry laugh, bitter and raw. Everywhere, she muttered. Nowhere. Foster homes. Shelters. The streets. You name it. The words cut deep. Michael had spent his life surrounded by luxury, his children never knowing a world without warmth or security. Yet here she was, his own blood, left to fend for herself in the harshest conditions imaginable. The weight of that truth nearly crushed him. Michael took a step closer, his voice softer this time. What's your name? It was the first question he should have asked, but he had been too stunned to think clearly. The girl hesitated, as if deciding whether to tell him, before finally whispering, Jasmine. The name sent another wave of shock through him. Jasmine. The same name he had given one of his daughters with his ex-wife. Coincidence? Or had Vanessa named her, that as a silent reminder of what he had unknowingly left behind? Michael ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. Jasmine. He stopped himself, unsure of what to say. What could he say? Sorry for not knowing you existed? Sorry for the life you've had to endure? There weren't enough apologies in the world to undo the years of suffering she had gone through. I don't expect anything from you. She cut in before he could speak. I'm not here for money or handouts. I don't know why I told you. She let out a humorless chuckle. Maybe I just wanted to see if you'd even care. The word stung, more than he cared to admit. Did he care? More than anything. But how could he prove that to someone who had spent her whole life believing he didn't? Jasmine, he said, his voice steady this time. I don't know how we got here, but I swear to you, I'm listening now. And if you let me, I'd like to help. For the first time, her hardened expression cracked, a flicker of uncertainty flashing in her eyes. She didn't respond immediately, and Michael knew trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt in a night. But as she finally gave a small, reluctant nod, he felt something shift. Maybe this wasn't the end of the conversation. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning. Jasmine's silence lingered between them, thick and unyielding, like the cold night air. Michael had never been good at waiting. He was a man of action, of instinct, but he knew this moment wasn't about him. It was about her, a daughter he never knew, a life he had never touched. He wanted to say more, to promise things he wasn't sure he could yet deliver, but he held back. Instead, he gestured to his car, the black SUV idling at the curb. Let me take you somewhere safe, he said, his voice gentle but firm. She hesitated, her body tense, as if the offer itself was a trap. I don't do pity, she muttered, crossing her arms over her thin hoodie. I don't do charity. Michael shook his head. It's not charity. It's a choice. Yours. He watched her carefully, recognizing the sharp edge of defiance in her eyes. It was a look he had seen in his own reflection many times before, back when he was young, hungry, fighting for something bigger than himself. The seconds stretched, and for a moment, Michael thought she would turn him down. But then, with a slow exhale, she nodded. All right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Relief washed over him as he opened the car door, stepping aside to let her in. She climbed in hesitantly, shrinking into the seat, her posture guarded. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, the city lights flashing past them, Michael stole a glance at her. She looked so young, yet there was an exhaustion in her expression that didn't belong to someone her age. He thought about all the nights she had spent alone, the dangers she must have faced. The idea of it made his stomach churn. "Are you hungry?" he asked, breaking the silence. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I could eat." He nodded to the driver. "Take us somewhere good." It was a small gesture, but for now, it was all he could offer. They ended up at a quiet diner on the outskirts of downtown, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. Inside, the warm light softened the sharp angles of Jasmine's face, making her look less like a hardened survivor and more like the teenager she still was. They sat across from each other in a booth, an uneasy silence settling between them. When the waitress came by, Jasmine ordered without hesitation pancakes, eggs, and extra bacon. Michael watched, surprised by the choice. "Breakfast for dinner," he mused. She smirked, the first real expression he had seen from her. "It's the best meal of the day," she said. "Besides, when you don't know where your next one is coming from, you stop caring what time it is." The words hit him like a gut punch. He had spent his life making split-second decisions on the court, but nothing in his career had prepared him for this conversation. "That won't happen again," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not while I'm here." Jasmine stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head. "You say that now," she murmured, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But people always leave. They always have." Her voice carried a weight that was too heavy for someone her age. Michael leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "I can't change the past," he admitted. "But I can change what happens next." She studied him, her skepticism clear, but there was something else too. Something fragile, like hope barely holding on. Finally, she sighed. "We'll see," she said. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was something, a start. And for now, that was enough. The quiet hum of the diner surrounded them. But inside Michael's mind, a storm was raging. He had spent decades mastering the art of focus, blocking out the noise, silencing the distractions, but nothing had prepared him for this. Jasmine sat across from him, devouring her pancakes with the kind of hunger that spoke of deprivation, of too many nights spent with an empty stomach. Every bite she took made his guilt deepen. How had he never known about her? How had Vanessa kept this from him? He gripped his coffee mug, his knuckles whitening. "Your mother," he began cautiously, trying to piece together the missing years. "She never tried to reach me?" Jasmine didn't look up, didn't slow her eating. "She wrote you letters," she said between bites. "Never sent them." That revelation hit harder than he expected. "Why?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Jasmine pushed her plate aside and leaned back in her seat. "She was proud," she said simply. Said she didn't want to be one of those women. You know, the ones who come knocking years later, asking for a check. Her tone was bitter, but there was something else there too, an underlying sadness. She thought she was doing the right thing, that she could handle it on her own. Michael exhaled slowly. It was exactly the kind of thing Vanessa would do. She had always been fiercely independent, determined to carve her own path. And in doing so, she had left Jasmine to face a world that had shown her no mercy. "She was wrong," he said, the words laced with regret. Jasmine gave a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah, well, it doesn't change much now, does it?" She looked at him, then really looked at him. "Where were you anyway?" Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. "All these years, what were you doing while I was figuring out how to survive?" Michael's chest tightened. What was he doing? Winning championships, building an empire, raising other children while his own flesh and blood struggled alone. He had no defense, no excuse. "I didn't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "If I had, you didn't," she cut in. "That's the point." She shook her head, her fingers tapping anxiously against the table. "Look, I didn't tell you all this to make you feel bad, okay? I don't even know why I told you at all." She hesitated, biting her lip. "I guess I just wanted to see if you were the kind of man people say you are." The word stung more than any loss he had ever suffered, because the truth was, he had no idea what kind of man he was to her. A stranger, a disappointment, maybe even a mistake. "And?" he asked, bracing himself. Jasmine studied him for a moment, then exhaled. "Jury's still out." The waitress returned, refilling their coffee, oblivious to the emotional battlefield between them. Michael leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Let me prove it to you," he said, not as a plea, but as a promise. "Whatever you need, wherever you want to go from here, I want to be part of it." Jasmine's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, her guard still up. But something in her posture had softened, just a fraction. "I don't need saving," she murmured. Michael nodded. "Maybe not. But maybe we both need something else." She didn't respond right away. But for the first time, she didn't pull away either. And in that small, quiet moment, he knew they had taken the first real step towards something neither of them could yet define. The drive back was steeped in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The weight of the conversation at the diner lingered between them, unspoken but undeniable. Michael stole a glance at Jasmine, curled up in the passenger seat of his SUV, her fingers absently picking at a loose thread on her hoodie. She had agreed to come with him, reluctantly, hesitantly, but it was something. A start. As they pulled into the long, winding driveway of his home, she let out a low whistle. "Damn," she muttered under her breath. The house was massive, a testament to decades of success and hard work. But now, for the first time, Michael saw it through different eyes, through hers. To someone who had spent years struggling just to find a place to sleep, this must have felt like another world entirely. He stepped out of the car and watched as Jasmine followed, her movements cautious. "It's big," she said, stuffing her hands into her pockets. "Yeah," Michael admitted. "But it's just a house." She scoffed. "No, it's a castle." There was no bitterness in her tone, just quiet disbelief. He wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he didn't. Instead, he led her inside, the motion sensor lights illuminating the grand entryway. Jasmine's gaze flickered across the space, taking in the expensive art, the high ceilings, the carefully curated decor. Then, her eyes landed on something unexpected, a framed picture on the mantelpiece. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing against the glass. It was a family portrait, Michael, his ex-wife, and their children. A life she had never been a part of. "Nice picture," she said, her voice unreadable. Michael stepped beside her, his chest tightening. "That was a long time ago," he murmured. "Things change." Jasmine turned to face him, her expression guarded. "Not for me," she said simply. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know this is a lot," he admitted. "I don't expect you to just trust me overnight." He gestured toward the staircase. "There's a guest room upstairs. It's yours for as long as you need." Jasmine hesitated, her fingers tightening around the straps of her backpack. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice small. "I'm not used to all this." Michael met her gaze. "Then let's figure it out together." She studied him for a long moment before nodding, just barely. Then, without another word, she turned and walked up the stairs, disappearing into the shadows. Michael let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, no idea how to bridge the gap of all the lost years. But one thing was certain, Jasmine was here now. And for the first time, that had to be enough. The day unfolded slowly, each moment stretching between Michael and Jasmine, like an invisible barrier neither of them knew how to cross. After breakfast, Michael gave her space, letting her settle in at her own pace. She spent most of the morning wandering through the house, exploring the rooms with cautious curiosity. Everything was pristine, expensive, untouchable, so far removed from the world she had known that it almost felt unreal. She trailed her fingers along the polished wooden banister of the grand staircase, pausing by the wall lined with framed photographs. They were moments frozen in time, Michael with his children, with his teammates, with his championship trophies. A life full of love, success, and security. A life she had never been part of. She lingered on one photo in particular, a shot of Michael with his sons and daughters, all smiling, all looking effortlessly at home in his embrace. A dull ache settled in her chest. She didn't belong in this picture. Maybe she never would. "You're not snooping, are you?" Michael's voice broke through the silence, startling her. She turned, finding him leaning casually against the doorframe, arms crossed, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. She scoffed, stepping back from the photos. "If I was, I wouldn't get caught." He chuckled, walking toward her. "Fair enough." He glanced at the picture she had been staring at, his expression softening. "That was taken a few years ago." Jasmine nodded but didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to feel. Resentment? Jealousy? Maybe just emptiness. They know about me, she asked suddenly. Michael hesitated before shaking his head. Not yet, he admitted. I wanted to talk to you first. The idea of it made her stomach tighten. His other kids, his real kids, had grown up with him. They had birthdays with him, holidays, memories. She was the outsider, the mistake no one had known existed. Guess that's going to be a fun conversation, she muttered, shoving her hands in her hoodie pocket. Michael sighed. Jasmine, he began, but she shook her head. Forget it, she said quickly. I don't need to be part of your family. She stopped herself, not even sure what she was trying to say. Michael watched her carefully. You are part of my family, he said, his voice steady. That doesn't change just because we didn't know before. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah? And what if they don't see it that way? Michael exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. Then we figure it out, he said. Together? Jasmine wanted to believe him, but life had taught her not to expect things to last. Still, as she looked at him, at the quiet determination in his expression, she felt something shift, something she wasn't ready to name. We'll see, she muttered, echoing the words she had told him the night before. Michael didn't push. He just nodded. We will. For now. That was enough. The ball hit the pavement with a steady rhythm, echoing across the private court as Michael bounced it between his hands. Jasmine stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching him with an unreadable expression. All right, he said, tossing her the ball. Let's see what you got. She caught it instinctively, but hesitated, looking down at the familiar orange surface. It felt foreign in her hands, heavy, like the weight of everything she had never been given the chance to have. She dribbled once, awkwardly, the ball nearly bouncing off her foot. Michael smirked. Okay, not terrible, he teased. She shot him a glare. I haven't even started. She tried again, this time keeping control, but the movement felt unnatural. This is stupid, she muttered. I don't do this. Michael stepped forward, folding his arms. Yeah? And what do you do? She hesitated before shrugging. Survive. The word was sharp, cutting through the cool afternoon air. Michael nodded, understanding more than he let on. That's a skill too, he admitted. But trust me, this is more than just a game. He took a step back, motioning for her to try again. Come on, you're already here. Jasmine let out a long breath before attempting another dribble. This time it was smoother, more controlled. A flicker of something crossed her face. Maybe frustration, maybe intrigue. Now shoot, Michael instructed. She rolled her eyes but lifted the ball, attempting a shot. It fell short, bouncing off the rim. She groaned. See? I suck. Michael grinned. Nah, you're just getting started. He retrieved the ball and passed it back. Again, she exhaled, adjusting her stance, trying again. The next shot missed, and the one after that. But Michael didn't let up. He guided her movements, showing her how to use her legs, how to follow through. Slowly, she started to improve. Not perfect, not even close, but something shifted in her posture. Something looser, more willing. After an hour, she finally made a clean shot. The ball swished through the net, and for the first time since she had arrived, Jasmine smiled, a real, unguarded smile. Michael saw it, felt the moment settle in his chest. There you go, he said, nodding. Told you. She shook her head, laughing lightly. Beginner's luck. He chuckled. Or maybe you've got more in you than you think. She didn't respond, but something in her eyes softened. Maybe for the first time, she believed it too. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the court as Jasmine dribbled the ball again. She moved with more confidence now, the stiffness in her shoulders loosening with each attempt. Michael stood a few feet away, watching her with quiet pride. She wasn't just learning basketball, she was learning something deeper. Trust, resilience, the ability to let go, even if just for a moment. She took another shot. The ball hit the backboard and bounced in. She threw her arms up in mock victory. I'm basically a pro now, she smirked. Michael laughed. Oh yeah? Think you could take me one-on-one? She gave him a pointed look. I may not know much about basketball, but I'm not stupid. He chuckled, passing her the ball again. We'll work up to it. They played until the sky turned dusky purple, the court illuminated by soft overhead lights. Michael found himself lost in the simple rhythm of it, passing, dribbling, laughing. For a man who had built his life on competition, this moment felt different. It wasn't about winning. It was about connection. Jasmine, too, seemed to sense the shift. She was still guarded, still carrying the weight of her past, but there was something lighter in her steps, something almost hopeful. As they walked back toward the house, Jasmine slowed her pace. This was cool, she admitted, shoving her hands into her hoodie pocket. Haven't had a night like this in ever. Michael glanced at her, his heart tightening. There's more where that came from, he said. If you want it. She hesitated, then nodded, barely perceptible. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Michael sat in his home office, staring at his phone. The weight of the conversation he had been avoiding pressed down on him. He had always been in control, on the court, in business and life, but this was different. This was his family, and no amount of championships or wealth could prepare him for what he had to do next. Taking a deep breath, he finally dialed the number. "Hey, Dad," Jeffrey answered, his voice light and unsuspecting. "What's up?" Michael hesitated, his grip tightening on the phone. "I need to talk to you and your siblings. It's important." A pause. Then, "Everything okay?" Michael exhaled slowly. "Just come by the house tonight. I'll explain then." The hours crawled by after that. Jasmine spent most of the day outside, sitting by the edge of the patio, lost in thought. Michael could tell she was restless. She had let her guard down last night, just a little, but now the walls were creeping back up. "They're coming tonight," he finally told her, stepping outside. She didn't look at him. "Your kids?" He nodded. "Yeah." She let out a short breath, shaking her head. "And you're just going to drop this on them? Hey, meet your long-lost sister who's been sleeping on park benches." Michael sighed. "It's not like that." She turned to face him, her jaw tight. "It is like that." Michael sat down beside her, his voice steady. "I won't let them treat you any differently." Jasmine scoffed. "You don't know that." He met her gaze, unwavering. "I do." The doubt in her eyes was still there. But this time, she didn't push him away. That evening, his kids arrived one by one. Jeffrey, Marcus, and Jasmine, his first daughter, the one who had grown up knowing him, living in his world. When they settled into the living room, their expressions ranged from curious to concerned. "All right, Dad," Marcus said, leaning forward. "What's going on?" Michael exhaled, his gaze flickering to Jasmine, who sat stiffly in the corner. This was it, the moment he couldn't take back. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said. He turned to Jasmine, giving her the choice. She hesitated, just for a second before standing. "My name is Jasmine," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. "And I think I'm your sister." The room fell into stunned silence. The silence in the room was suffocating. Jasmine stood rigid, her arms crossed over her chest as she faced the three strangers who shared her blood. Michael watched his children's reactions carefully, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Jeffrey blinked, trying to process what he had just heard. Marcus ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. And Jasmine, his other daughter, just stared, her expression unreadable. "Wait," Jeffrey finally spoke, his voice slow and cautious. "What do you mean? You think you're our sisters?" Jasmine's fingers twitched at her sides. "I mean exactly that," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "My mom, Vanessa Carter, she told me my father was Michael Jordan. I never had proof, but she swore it until the day she died." The tension in the room thickened. Michael cleared his throat, stepping forward. "I didn't know," he admitted, his voice firm. "I swear to you if I had." "But you didn't," Jasmine cut in. "And now we're here." Jeffrey rubbed his temples. "This is a lot." "No kidding," Marcus muttered under his breath. Jasmine swallowed hard. She had prepared herself for rejection, for anger, for disbelief. But somehow, their quiet hesitation stung more than anything. Michael looked at his children. "I know this is unexpected, but Jasmine is family. No matter what." His voice was final, unwavering. Jasmine, his first daughter, spoke for the first time, her voice softer than the others. "How long have you been on your own?" she asked, looking at Jasmine. Jasmine hesitated before answering. "Since my mom died," she admitted. 2 years. A beat of silence. Then, to Jasmine's surprise, her sister's face softened. That must have been hard, she murmured. Jasmine looked away. Yeah, something shifted then. Not complete acceptance. Not yet, but something less cold, less distant. Marcus leaned back, letting out a deep breath. This is crazy, he muttered, shaking his head. But, it's not impossible. He looked at Michael. Are you going to get a test or something? Michael nodded. Yeah, he said. If Jasmine wants to. Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Michael met her gaze, his expression unreadable. No matter what the test says, it doesn't change anything for me. Jasmine swallowed. We'll see. The night ended with uncertainty, but not with rejection. And that, for Jasmine, was more than she had ever dared to hope for. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she let herself imagine, for the first time, that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, for the first time, she didn't have to be. If you made it this far, comment where you're watching from and let us know if the story of Justice moved.